Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Sorry, it's been a while since I've put a lesson out there. Just been rather busy. But I had a request from one of my students to paint irises with watercolor. And so we selected this photograph that I got from a photo sharing site called paintmyphoto.com. And I think the shapes are relatively easy to work with in watercolor. The background in the photo is this nice bokeh, these blurry little circles, and it's just a pleasing picture. I set the size for the photo to 11 by 14, and I'm going to show you how I get my line drawing onto my watercolor paper to begin with. So this is just printed out on copy paper. I'm using, it's a clear mylar sheet that you can just see right through it. And I place the mylar sheet onto the photograph, and then I use a permanent black marker. This specific one is by the Zebra company, zebra like the animal with the stripes. You can get them on Amazon. These ones are from Japan. It's got Japanese writing on it. There's two ends on this. If you pull off this cap, you pull off the end cap, there's a very fine line, and if you pull off the main cap, there's a thicker line. The reason I use these is because they dry so quickly. You can trace your photo and not smear your lines if your hand runs through it. So what I do is, and I've already done it, and maybe you can see it. I'm hoping that you can. I just go through most of the time with the fine end, and I trace along the edges of things. And there's like little shorthand that I use to tell me what's going on in the photo. For instance, there's a very dark edge right down here. So what I do where it's really dark is I just put taps of dots in here. And that's going to tell me that there's a lot of dark color there. That dark color fades away as it comes towards the center of that petal. So I space out my dots, the less the color gets. Also, with petals like this, it's nice, and same thing with fur. If you were tracing an animal, I like to indicate the direction that the veins are running in the petal, the directions that the fur is growing, that type of thing. If an area is really, really dark, like these leaves are like almost black, they're very dark green. This petal is extremely dark blue in here. So areas that I know for sure are extremely dark, I just put cross hatching in it, which is lines going in opposite directions. That tells me it's very, very dark there. Now, I could do that in the petal in here and here, but this picture is relatively simple. For me, I don't think I need it. All I have to do is look at the photo and I can see that. When you're using a more complex photo with a lot of different areas, you're probably better to do that than not. Places where there's a break in color or a shift in color. So for instance, in this petal right here, this is lighter out here, and then it goes darker in the center of the petal and a little bit lighter on the edge again. So I just put a dashed line to indicate something's different going on here. Where it's really light, I've tried to indicate that on the pattern. And for the background, I just put dashed lines around where these circles are. And I put a Y for yellow. So I know that's going to be yellow. Here is a dark green color. So I put DG for dark green. Here there's an aqua color. So I put an A for aqua, just so that I know kind of what's what. Now, you don't have to go to all that trouble. You're certainly welcome to draw your own drawing and make your background how you want it. I'm just going to paint this picture the way I'm seeing it in the photo. But you're certainly welcome to use your own method. So once I have all of my drawing or tracing complete, the next thing I want to do is get the drawing onto my watercolor paper. I am using 140-pound cold press paper, which is pretty universal. This brand happens to be Fabriano. It's okay. I really like Arche from France as well. But sometimes that's, it's a budgetary concern. So You know, whatever you can afford that's the best for you to use. Now, this is a light box underneath here. And I want the light to come through my clear Mylar tracing. You can see that right here. This is just the tracing. You can see right through it. And I want to be able to see the lines. So what I'm going to do is put my watercolor paper on top of my line drawing for a minute. I'm just going to flip it over so that I can get it positioned on the paper where I want it. Roughly, I'm trying to center it on the page. The photo actually was a little bit short this way, so we can just extend this background and the stems down here just to add on a little bit, so we only have maybe half an inch or quarter of an inch margin the whole way around. But if you're doing a landscape or something architectural, you want to be sure that you're using a square edge to line it up and make sure that your horizon line or straight edge is straight on the paper and not crooked. But I think with this one, we can just sort of tell by looking at it. I'm pleased with where that is. So what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of Scotch tape and I'm going to tape it just to tack it down a little bit so it doesn't shift. Now we're going to flip this back over, turn on the light pad, and I'm hoping that you can see this. I'm going to shut my lights off for just a second, just in case you can't, so that you can see what I'm doing. That looks pretty good. So now I can see all of my black marker lines. And what I'm going to do is just take a pencil and lightly trace around my tracing. I don't want to press hard on this for a couple of reasons. I don't want a lot of dark lines on my painting that are going to show through. That's number one. Number two, if I press hard and dig with this pencil, it can score the paper. And once you have scored the paper, that spot is going to pull pigment right into it, much darker than anything else around it, and it will just magnify the scratches, so that you don't want that. Now I'm going to do that for this whole thing, and then we'll come back and start talking about paint and get going on the painting. But if you don't have a light box like this, not to worry. You can do the same thing if you put your line drawing on the back of your watercolor paper, just like I did, and take it to a sunny window. Place this up against the window with the sun coming in, and you'll be able to see the same thing. So there's no reason to have to go purchase a light box, but it's nice to have one, especially if you're working on very, very large paintings that are intricate and detailed, because that's hard to find a sunny window that's that big that you then have to stand up to and whatnot. But anyway, that's how I get my line drawing onto my paper. So I'm going to finish doing that, and then I will come back and we'll get started. Thank you. So just one other little thing I wanted to point out. It's hard to see where you've been and where you haven't been when you've got the light box on and you're trying to trace. So for instance, I can't tell right now if I've missed some of my lines here for the tracing. So to see that, all I have to do is shut off the light box, and immediately, let me put the lights on. Immediately, I can see I don't have petals here in the middle of that flower. So what I'll do then is just put the light box back on. Now I can see where I missed this whole petal here and here, and I will get those in. Again, I just want to caution, you only want these lines dark enough so that you can see them. If you get these on heavy and dark, you're going to be very displeased with the painting. Just put them dark enough so that you can see very light pressure on the pencil. I'm just using a regular 2H standard kind of pencil like you use in school. It's nothing fancy. It gets the job done. That's pretty much what I wanted to say about that. I'm almost done here, and then I'll be back. I don't know if I got this or not. I'll be back and we will get started. Okay, now we're ready to get our watercolor paper mounted onto some kind of a support board so that we can work on it. I am using a piece of, it's corrugated plastic. It comes in various sizes. It's got little ribs in it, but it's not ribbed enough that it's going to disturb your painting. They actually make it for yard signs for outdoors. It's corrugated like cardboard on the edge. Maybe I think you can see that. And it has ribs in it. It's very lightweight. The water is not going to affect it. And I just find it very easy to use. Now, I have measured off a 1/4 inch border the whole way around my picture here so that I get my tape. I'm going to tape this paper down, and I want to make the tape even so that I don't put the tape on crooked, because after you finish the painting and you take it off of the board and pull up the tape, you could find that you put the tape in too far, you didn't come far enough towards the edge with your paint, and now you've got this white gap that's not going to be covered by your mat, and that's just so frustrating. So I try to avoid that at all costs. So I'm using an art tape. And this is pretty wide. It's the only size I have on hand right now, or I would use something that's even half the size of this. But it's what I happen to have, so this is what I'm using. So I'm just going to place the tape right along the border that I've drawn. And I want to press it down pretty good on the edge that comes in contact with the paper. I'm using scissors to cut the tape. Okay, you get the idea. I'm going to take down these two sides and then I will be back. Okay, welcome back. The next thing I would like to talk about is the color selection. There aren't a whole lot of colors that we have to do this painting, because we can mix a lot with a few colors. And so I'm going to go over my palette right now. These are Winsor Newton paints. And I just got yellow on myself. Fine paper towel, excuse me. I have a tube that's leaking. Okay, so the paints that I'm using in this are Winsor Blue Red Shade. And that comes out looking like this. I test my colors to see what they're going to look like. I'll show you how I do it. So Winsor Blue Red Shade is right here. And I want to wet my brush and tickle up against the puddle of paint until I get a pretty rich mixture of it, because I want to see what it looks like full strength. Kind of the consistency of almost milk to cream. It's pretty thick. I can put this down on a little spare piece of paper I have left over, and that shows you what it looks like at its full strength, how dark it will be, exactly what shade it is. Then I rinse my brush, blot it just a little bit on a paper towel, and tickle up next to the edge of this and introduce water from the brush into the paint. And that shows you when I start to add water to it, I'm rinsing again. And I'm going to do the same thing here. If I keep adding water to the paint and it gets like a tint, what is it going to look like? So this one color, you can see, this one color gives me all these different values. And you want to use that to your advantage. So that is Winsor Blue Red Shade. And then the next color is Permanent Rose. This is a beautiful pink color. Just going to clean my palette up a second. Permanent Rose. I'm going to do the same thing. I want to get a nice full mix of it so that I can see what it looks like full strength. Beautiful for pink flowers. But in this case, we don't have pink flowers. But what we're going to do with this color is create violet by mixing it with the blue, create a darker blue by mixing it with the blue. Same thing, rinse the brush, tap a little bit on a paper towel, bring the damp brush to the puddle of paint and start pulling. Rinse, blot, do it again. And you'll see what it looks like as a tint. So again, there's 3 values. Now there's yellow. There's yellow in the painting, in the center, and in some of these spots in the bokeh background. So I'm using Cad Lemon color. Same thing, Cad Lemon full strength. Rinse and blot and start pulling. This one you can't see it so much, the middle value. It's a pretty strong color for yellow. Yellow is one of the weakest colors. Then I'm using Cad Red Deep, and that's the tube that is kind of leaky for me, so I'm not going to pick it up. But this is Cad Red Deep, and we're going to use that on these darker parts of the centers. Cad Red Deep. It looks like orange yellow. That makes beautiful tint. I could see painting sunflowers with a color like that. Very pretty. And then we've got some purple undertones. These iris are called Blue Siberian Iris, but there's some violet component to them. Not purpley purple, but there is a violet component. So the next color, and here's the tube. This is Cobalt Violet. Cobalt Violet. I happen to have some squirted out into this little paint carrier. You can see that this is a really transparent color. I cannot get strong color like I can with Cad Yellow Deep and the pardon me, and the blue, red, and yellow. This is not going to go as dark. It's more transparent, but in this case that's great because we will probably use it to glaze on top of some of the blue and make it look a little bit more violet. So with it being this transparent, sorry, there's a little bit of green there on the paper. With it being this transparent, it will make a really good glazing color. And you can see that when I pull it way out, it disappears to nothing. So it's a wimpy color, but wimpy colors are good sometimes. And the other color is Windsor Green Yellow Shade. Now, if you have Windsor Sap Green, which I don't have enough of to complete this painting, so I'm going to use this Windsor Green Yellow Shade and just make it work. If you have sap, I would say that would be the preferred color, but like I said, I don't have enough of it for all this green background. But this is a pretty strong color too. It comes out quite intense on its own. So you can see we're going to have to tone it with something, so it's not looking like Christmas green. But when you pull it out with water and get it really diluted, you can see it's close to this aqua color. There's a couple spots where there's just a little bit of aqua in the background, and I didn't want to have to introduce another whole tube of paint to just do those couple of spots. So I think if we thin down this Winsor green yellow shade enough, it'll be close enough. And then to get the rest of the colors, we're going to be mixing varying degrees of green plus the blue, green plus the blue plus the red, blue plus the red. So where you're seeing very light petals, like right in here, we're going to use just a tint of the blue color by itself because the color is so light. Remember that in watercolor, when you add water to your paint, it's the same thing if you were using acrylic or oil paint and you added white to your mix. Your white in watercolor is water because you can see it dilutes the paints into a tint. And another thing to keep in mind is that watercolor, when it's dry, will be lighter than when you first put it on the paper. That's another thing to keep in mind. Excuse me, it's the opposite of acrylic. Acrylic dries a shade darker. Watercolor dries lighter. So keep that in mind. But to get these darker blue tones in here, we're going to be mixing varying amounts of the blue and pink. And to get this dark, dark, dark color, we'll be mixing probably the green, blue, and rose color together. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say about the paint. It's nice if you have clean water. If you keep a couple of water containers next to you, use one for each time you rinse your brush and it gets dirty very quickly. Use the other one and keep it clean only when you need to dip into clean water. And the last thing I will say is it's very handy to keep your reference photo nearby so that you can see what it is you're painting. But if you really want to zoom in on details, you're best to look at the photo either on your phone or an iPad or Kindle or whatever device you can digitally look at a photo because you can see so much more detail that way than you can just by the printout. The printout really, it gives me a method to trace the picture so that I get the shapes right, and that's what I use it the best for. So I think we're ready to start painting, and I will be right back. Okay, to begin with, I would like to start on this petal here. There's not a lot going on with it. It's just kind of pretty flat and not a lot of detail to it or whatnot. It's sort of even blurry. Now I have mixed together my Winsor blue red shade plus some cobalt violet into a separate puddle here. And I added water to that because I don't want this really dark. And I'm going to start placing that into my petal. If you want a little bit better violet coverage, you can pick that up by itself, or you can pick up more of the blue. Let the colors mix and mingle as they will on the paper. There's a little bit of a darker edge. So I'm just going along this edge a little bit first, and I can do the same thing in the middle. I can actually pick up, just on the tip of my brush, a little bit of that blue by itself. Oop, that's too blue. Let's go over that with our mix and calm that down. But you can see that that's how you can vary the tones within what you're painting. And it's always interesting to do that than to just put the same color everywhere. It's much more interesting if you pick up different tones on your brush. I didn't say, but we are painting on dry paper. I did not wet anything first. We're using wet paint on dry paper. That's important for you to know. And you can see a few vague vein lines, which with the very, very tip of your brush, I'm almost afraid to put them in because I don't want too much detail. You can do it that way, which is called additive painting. You're adding paint into the picture. But there's also a way to create things by doing subtractive painting. So I'm rinsing my brush and wiping on a paper towel so that it's just damp. Over in this area of the petal, there's a little ruffle that is later. So what I want to do is just lift a little bit of this paint right here, just with a damp brush, and pull it away. And that's automatically going to make that spot lighter if I'm doing this at the right time in the drying cycle of this paint. I've probably done it a little bit prematurely because this paint is so wet that it's flooding back into the area. If I had been more patient and waited for this to dry just a little bit more, I would be more successful at it. So I'm trying to be patient right now. Up here, there's an area that's drying nicely. It's not totally dry. So I'm going to try to pull a little bit out of there and see if I have a little bit more success. And I had too much water in my brush for that. And now that creates a whole new issue. If there's too much water in your brush and it floods out, it's going to push the pigment that's already down there and create this horrible ring, which is called a bloom. I don't want that. My petal is not diseased. So I should have been more careful there. I'm trying to just brush it out a little bit so it doesn't have that terrible shape to it. Okay, that's more what I wanted right there. You can see that I'm picking up just pigment. I'm not laying down water that's flooding the area and creating that awful look like it came back again. I'm going to fill that in a little bit better. Wiping my brush. I have another lighter area down here. This is now beginning to dry and set up better. So it's a whole lot easier when you're doing lift out techniques at the right time. If you're trying to do it when you can still see like a puddle of paint flooding, that's not the right time. You want just to see the sheen disappear, but know that this is not a dry area yet. That's a good time to do this. And I think before I mess it up even more, I'm going to let that dry now. You have to know when to stop. You can always let it dry and come back and try to lift color or add another glaze of color to what you're working on. But the discipline in all of this is knowing I need to stop and let this dry before I can do anything more to it. Because if I keep playing in this wet paint and stroking on it back and forth and trying to fix things like you might do with acrylic or oil paint, what I would get is just one value and it's all going to be the same color and look overworked and not pretty at all. And we don't want to do that. So you just need to be disciplined enough to know I can't overwork this. I need to let this dry before I do anything more. All in all, I'm not displeased with that petal, but I don't like the bloom that I got up here. So in another layer, I'm going to see what I can do to fix that, but I'm not going to stress about it. You can see I got some nice wafts of the cobalt violet color up in here. That's just where it mingled in with the blue paint, and I think that's kind of pretty too. And then, okay, so the next thing is I can't do, once I've done an area like this and it's wet, I can't do anything right next to it. I can't do these petals here. I cannot do background behind it, because if I do, those colors are going to run right into what I just did. This has to be dry before I can introduce any more colors anywhere on the border of it. So I have to totally skip to a completely different area, leave that to dry, go on to the next petal. Leave that alone, go on to the next petal. When you're watercoloring, that's kind of what you have to do, is skip around, let something dry, then go back and make adjustments. Okay, let's move on.